Foster Gamble on. So welcome, Foster.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be with you.
So I wanted to. The first question I have for you, and I imagine that there have been a number of iterations, but who were you before the you that you are now?
Wow, you know, the older I get, the more when I look back, it makes sense. I'm sure a lot of people out there are in early stages of their life or middle stages of their life and wondering, wow, how do I make sense out of this? And I can just tell you that looking back tends to make more sense out of it. And when
Mm.
I look back I've just turned 75 years old and I'm blessed with good health. But I realize, that I've been here quite a while. And the benefit of that is it's given me a lot of time to try a lot of different things. So I'm old enough to have learned some important things and still young enough, hopefully, to remember some of them. So I think that I think I actually came here um, to help humanity try to figure out how to relate to energy successfully before we destroy ourselves.
Mm.
I was
Wow.
born shortly after the first nuclear explosions in Japan, and I've been obsessed since I was a child and told to get under my desk and put my arms over my head, in case of a nuclear attack. Because that was the moment when I realized, wait a minute, I don't think the adults in charge have this figured out. So I really started on my own quest to figure out, okay, how do we resolve conflict? How do we stay away from unleashing powers that could destroy all life on planet Earth? And how do we uh, master the greatest force of all, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the power of love? So that's
Mm.
really been my major quest all my life. And I finally, I was a filmmaker in college. Actually created the filmmaking department at the university where I was because I wanted to make films instead of write thesis that no one would ever be interested in reading. So I told my friends that I wanted to ultimately make films about what was in the way of humanity thriving. And
Mm.
I thought I was being very humble, saying, well, it'll probably take me 5, maybe even 10 years to figure that out. Well, it was 42 years later that I finally felt ready to make the first Thrive film because I thought that I had a sufficient understanding of what was going on in the world and solutions that were commensurate to the problem. So that's a brief overview of what I think has been motivating me all my life.
Mm. So beautiful. Can you identify, maybe a couple of perceived obstacles, and I say perceived because I believe, and I imagine you do as well, that everything really is happening for us, and obstacles are just opportunities, disguised.
Yes.
So, but can you identify maybe one or two really big obstacles in your life that you had to overcome to really get to where you are now?
Yeah, and I agree with you that when I look back, the obstacles, as obnoxious as they were in each case something which, using the title of your conference, they unleashed me. They actually
Mhm.
liberated me for things I hadn't even dreamt of. And I think one of the first ones was I was raised in a sort of quasi Christian family. My dad didn't go to church, but my mother did, and but I had a lot of questions. I was very spiritual from the time I was a young kid, but I didn't buy into, talking snakes and virgin births and all that stuff. So in Sunday school, I would really pepper the teachers with questions about this, and they would get very uncomfortable and basically try to shut me up and ultimately ask me to leave. And so, I was a little offended, but then I realized, okay, now I'm actually free to find my own spiritual truth. And then the same thing
Mm.
happened in high school. It turns out that I had a gift for math and science. It came very easily, and I was passionate about it. So, the school that I went to, the high school, gathered a group of about 5 or 6 of us who had those talents and brought in some special teachers and just put us on a fast track. And it was very exciting. I had the best teacher I ever had my first year. The second year was kind of a mediocre teacher, and the third year was a terrible one. And I kept this teacher, this physics teacher, was talking about, some important facts, like the universe is 15 billion light years across. And wow, that's really big. I said, but what's it floating in? And he got very uncomfortable and said, we don't question that. We don't know, and therefore we're not going to discuss it. And I said, well, I just have trouble imagining an end because as soon as you imagine an end, there's got to be something on the other side of the end. So what is that? So basically, it got so disruptive that I quit. I quit all math and science. But, well, formally I quit it, but I've been studying it literally the rest of my life. I found a term when I read Bucky Fuller's operating manual for Spaceship Earth that gave me a lot of relief. He said, in order not to go extinct, humanity needs more comprehensivists. And he described a comprehensivist as someone whose first priority was connecting all the dots to understand how everything worked together. And I realized that was the first time anybody had put a name on my passion, because ever since I can remember, I was always interested in all the different levels of knowledge and history and current events and science fiction, future, and so forth. And so I finally kind of got acknowledgement for that I wasn't dabbling. I was actually trying to connect it all in a way that made sense. So that also unleashed me on a path that, that enabled me to do something as comprehensive as Thrive.
Mm, it's beautiful. And I imagine I'm following in your footsteps, because that's how my mind works as well.
Yeah.
But what would you say to individuals that their mind doesn't work like that? They're kind of caught up in their day to day, and they feel like they're stuck, or that they really have no control or power, and maybe they've given it away to programming and old parent and that sort of thing. What would you say to somebody to begin to open up to the idea that they've got so much power and everything really is connected, and they can start to move in that direction?
Yeah. Well, after our conversation, I'm intending to present some of the best perspectives on that type of thing that I've found throughout my life and how they fit together. But in a nutshell, it's what you're doing. I ask myself, does it give you energy? Is it ultimately the best use of you? And that doesn't mean that you don't have to occasionally do work that you'd rather not doing. You got to chop wood and carry water and things like that. But ultimately, whose life is it that you're leading? And if it's not giving you energy, then you need to look for a deeper sense of not only purpose, but a sense of what is my particular path. Because actually, a relatively small percentage of people that I've met are comprehensivists. But the key is that if we're each following our passion, then we can get to know each other. And when we need to or want to collaborate on our project, then you bring somebody in who's really good at the law, and someone else who's really good at the arts, and someone else who's good at science or spirituality. What we've found is it's not only very satisfying, but it's really effective in terms of solving the problems of the world, to work in what we call in the Thrive movement a whole systems sector solutions model. And if you find your passion and get good at it, then you'll find out who you are. And when you work in collaboration with other people, you can bring a tremendous amount of clarity and purpose and motivation to the table, even though you're not covering all the different areas. And I'll break that down shortly for your network. But it was one of the most powerful things that I found that has translated into successful activism for groups all over the world. Because one of the most common reasons why activist groups don't succeed is when everybody's trying to do it all, there's a tendency for activists to get burned out very quickly. But when you realize that you can focus on your passion and what you're good at and just collaborate with people who bring in what else is needed, then there's a sense of synergy that unleashes not only your creativity and passion, but your road to success.
I love that. What was great as you were speaking was um, this idea of being open to everything. You don't have to do everything yourself,
Yeah.
but you have to be open to everything, and then bring your kind of piece of the puzzle into the collective. And then I think that's can really open all the doors for each
Yeah.
of us.
And I would add one more
I love that.
obstacle, which I think is really important. And again, I'll go into this a little more deeply later. But um, as a child, I was not trained emotionally at all. And when you start bucking the system, when you start actually following your own truth, and it separates somewhat from the quote normal path, the muggles,
Mm,
the normies will come after you. And one of the things that I needed to learn along the way is that the feelings that I would get overwhelmed by in my body were actually really trying to help me. And I spent years studying with the best teachers that I could find to try to figure out the emotional mystery. What is going on with fear and sadness and anger and joy? What
mm,
are these things and how can I relate to them without being overwhelmed by them, without having to fight back against them? I spent 15 years studying and teaching the nonviolent martial art of Aikido. And that was really the breakthrough for me is that, okay, how can I do Aikido with my emotions, which is to step out of the way, turn and go with them, actually experience those emotions and free myself from them so that I can
mm,
use my motive energy as motivation rather than be stopped by emotion. Because um, when you're trying to actually operate at the cutting edge of this challenging world that we're in right now, there's a lot of forces, both nefarious and just ignorant, that will try to stop you. And if
mm,
your sense of self esteem or your ability to handle criticism or your ability to handle fear and so forth is not at a pretty mature level, then you will be very easily manipulated. And we're watching that in the world right now, where so many people would just
mm,
rather blindly comply, even if it means losing their business, their health, their family, their wealth, etc., than to actually deal with what comes up when you go after truth and freedom.
mm. Yeah, that fear is a big one, and something I've identified recently. Like anytime I've held back from anything, if I were to boil down to one emotion, it's fear.
Yeah.
So how do you what would you say to somebody who's not used to identify their emotions? I think again in this world we've been conditioned to either numb or I mean maybe we're afraid and that's what's keeping us from, as you said, in this world of flying to everything. But for someone who's really not used to feeling in their form, how do you start that?
Well, this is a wonderful conversation, and I'm really glad to hear you acknowledge your challenges in this way also, because I think it's really helpful, especially for men, to see people like you and me who are strong, who are athletic, who are reasonably successful in various areas, and to see that that doesn't mean we've got it all together. That doesn't mean we don't have strong feelings and deal with emotional obstacles and so forth. So the major key for me at the top is to be really humble and make friends with all of your emotions. Because when you make
Mm,
friends with and allow them to be, then they can serve their purpose, which is to bring you back to your center and allow you to have full access to the energy which moves in a toroidal form. It comes from the universe through your toroidal energy body and into the earth and operating the same in the other direction as well. And when you can be at the center of that, there's literally unlimited power available. And later on, I'll
mm,
go into the details. There's a cycle that I discovered after years of study. There's a cycle of how emotions work. And once you realize that allowing yourself to feel the anger in a responsible way is going to release the anger, then there's a motive to do it.
mm,
But the bad news is then the sadness is going to come up underneath. But then you need to make friends with, crying, just feeling the sadness. Good news is then the sadness disappears. Bad news is then the fear comes up underneath it, and that's what you've been running from. That's the illusionary dragon that is supposedly, our enemy, but it's actually our deepest friend. It's that last
mm,
level of letting go into feeling the gut level fear, the vibrations that are really strong in your gut which when you surrender to them, then what my martial arts teacher used to say, when you're when you're under pressure and you start feeling butterflies, don't try to kill them, just make sure they're flying in formation, because all
Mm,
that energy will be released as you allow yourself to just let go of your body. So you're not resisting all that energy. It'll bring you back to your center. And then what happens is it unleashes a whole cycle of expansive emotions. And that's what will fuel your, not only your power, but your happiness, your fulfillment, and your spiritual connection.
mm, I love that.
We did
So,
an
so powerful.
animation of that, but I'll show people in a few minutes. We did an animation of that sums it up quite efficiently.
I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see that. So last question. I mean, we could obviously unpack that and continue on, but last question for this segment. Any other kind of tips? And I'm again, I imagine there are quite a few, but any other tips that would go against conventional wisdom or myths that are out there in terms of actually moving into peak performance in every area, not just in one?
Well, when I look back on my own path, I my first real spiritual path was sports. I played and competed at an expert level in 13 different sports, and uh, I had friends in each of those sports who went on to become professional, and that never really motivated me. I know what it takes to be a professional athlete, and I wasn't interested in confining myself to a single sport. And at first, I felt guilty about that. Oh, am I running away from this or that? And when I look back on it now, I realize no. I wasn't interested in the trophy. I wasn't interested in the money. I was interested in learning the principles that sport was teaching me. And
Mm,
playing lots of different sports allowed me to see the principles of how do I relate successfully to my body, to my emotions, to my mind, to my spirit, in such a way that then I could take my relative level of mastery in each of those areas and then apply it to whatever I did in my life. So
mm,
don't get caught up comparing your path to other people's. You can be inspired by them, but yours is always going to be at least slightly different than anyone you know. And if you cherish that and nurture that, then you find your own unique path. And on your deathbed, you won't be lying there regretting that you didn't live your life.
mm. So powerful. Yeah, I often joke, if somebody asks how I'm doing it, I'll share I'm living the dream. But then my dream or is it somebody else's dream? So make sure you
Right. That's right. Yeah. Right. Well said. Yes.
beautiful.